please put on your reflective mode hats and sit down for a few moments. Let me begin with the observation that obviously from the front I see everything, I hear everything, even more things than you think I hear. So yes, I'll start with the acknowledgement that when Peter in his sermon uses as a proof that they weren't drunk because it's only 9 o'clock in the morning, I heard the smirks, I saw the faces. I've been there. A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But I share with you a thought as we start, and think about this. The very first encounter with the Jesus movement was so powerful, and these people were filled with such enthusiasm and such joy. The reaction of the crowd around them was that they've got to be drunk because nobody could be this happy. Think what that means. And that is where Christianity is born. This is a very difficult day to preach. I'll be the very first person to acknowledge that. It's the ultimate punishment from the professor who teaches the course in preaching. When you get your assignment, you're going to preach in front of the class, and your readings are given on Pentecost Sunday. Very difficult, because we're dealing with a concept and we're dealing with a historical event, but we're not. We're dealing with also with what is given to us to hear and to see and to think and to do. I bore the people who were in Bible study this past week. They know what I'm about to say as I start, and I apologize, but I do want to set a tone. This event is so powerful that Luke, who is not in the room, who's trying to give us a recollection of what that early generation experienced, Luke, who himself is going to be a convert of Paul many years down the line, he uses the words of metaphor in such a subtle way that we kind of pass over our head. Because what does he say? He says that this was like fire, as if it were wind, as, like, all of those comparative words. Because there's nothing human he can use in language to try to comprehend what those 120 in that room went through. And even the person who was in there, Peter, who up to this point is a pretty good fisherman, a pretty lousy good friend and disciple, but who will ultimately become the head of this movement and will be their spokesman, at least through the beginnings, that first generation. When he tries to explain to people and apologize that they're not drunk, but also tries to explain to them what they've gone through, all he can do is literally catch his breath and try to explain to people through the words of their own scriptures. Remember in our scriptures where it is said by those nameless prophets of old, or even the ones that we know like Joel or Isaiah, one day God would pour forth his Spirit on us. And we had no idea what it meant, but it sounded good. Well, we know what it means, and it's shaken us to the core. And from that original group of very fear-filled prayers, there will be transformed into a group of fearless preachers. And that wandering group of disciple students are going to create the Jesus movement that exists to this very day. And their message is the same as the one we're given, that at one time, even before time, God had a plan. And God made a covenant with one nation and had held them up to be a light and an example for every people. And used their words of prayer and used their scriptures to convey an even important message. That this God one day would elect a group to be his people. And that one people would not be bound by language or ethnicity or blood descent, but only by faith, which is imparted by that Spirit. And as Peter will desperately try to tell not only that first group that whoever listened to him, but also to us, the person he knew as a mentor, the person he knew as a friend, the person who called him from his fishing business and his marriage and shattered his life, the one he would ultimately deny but still be reconciled with because God's love and forgiveness calls even flawed people, especially flawed people. That Jesus promised that there would be a promised one, a strength giver. And I use that in the original meaning of the word comfortor, cum fortis in Latin, with strength. Somebody who would empower that first group and all who follow them to proclaim the good news of who this Jesus was. That he was one who, yes, he broke bread with outcasts and sinners, he healed the sick, he proclaimed good news to those who were poor, and completed on a cross the sacrifice of his life. But more importantly, he is not just the one filled with the Spirit, he is the one who bestows it, because he is God incarnate. And our world is changed. Send forth your Spirit, and they will be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Those are the words we sang before. It's part of Psalm 104. that Jesus has dispensed the Spirit to us. So Luke maybe doesn't quite explain what happened. He uses the best vocabulary he does. And again, my apologies to those who were in Bible study this past Tuesday evening. When he uses the imagery he does, he's very confrontational with the people in front of us in a way that's kind of subtle to us. We don't get this. But when he says, the room was filled with fire, it was noisy, it was loud, it shook us. And then those people who listened to him said, yeah, this sounds like Mount Sinai. This sounds like the encounter with God that people first had. And when he talks about a wind blowing, they can't help but think about if the very opening of Genesis, where the wind of God, the breath of God, the Spirit of God blows across the waters and life is created. Or, and I say this with great love, when Muriel used to read on Holy Saturday every night the story of Ezekiel and the bones, the dry bones, it is the breath and wind of God that fills those dead bones with life. All of that stuff is in their heads. And when Peter starts talking about this is what's happened to us, speaking to that crowd, and over the centuries and over the millennia speaking to us, he is saying that life of God which was given to us is given to you. When you're baptized, you're part of a movement that can change the face of the earth. And I leave you with one final thought, and I'm going to leave you and see if I can do it without the text in front of me. Don't leave it alone, Ann. This is the Holy Spirit telling me either I get it or I don't. When I was a seminarian, when I was studying to be a priest, I was in a Roman Catholic seminary, and I was amazed at the number of Anglican authors we had to read in the program we were in at the Gregorian, which is kind of ironic. I guess God does have a sense of humor. But one of the authors I had to read was a man by the name of John Taylor. And he spoke of the Pentecost event. And as a reminder, he said, you know what? In the catechisms that you studied when you were a child, and most of you are too young for this, but there are some of us who are old enough to remember this. Pentecost was spoken of as the birthday of the church. That was the phrase that was given, quote unquote. The church is born. The Holy Spirit was given to the church at Pentecost. But this Anglican theologian, who I've never read another book again, because being an assigned text when you're in school, you never go back to those books again. Yeah. So those of you who have gone back to grad school, you get that. But he reminded us, not only was the Spirit given to the church at Pentecost, think about this. We were given to the Spirit at Pentecost. Because what happens to them is that whatever power they're filled with, they've got to go out of that room and witness and preach and live for and ultimately die for the good news of Jesus Christ. Well, that happens to us. What we do as Christians, filled with God's Spirit at baptism, if it stays in this room, it's nice. But what does it mean? The Mets won last night for a change. That's nice. But what is it? Miracle, yeah. But is it going to mean anything in the long run? I doubt it. It hurts me to say that, but I do. The point is, if the presence of God, which is within you, remains in the context of the walls of a building, then church is not church. The presence and power of God, the mission of God, takes place when we walk out and we witness to who Jesus is. And what a world it might be if everyone out there watching us and paying attention to us and seeing what we truly believe were to say about us, this group is too happy, they've got to be drunk. What would that mean in terms of faith? Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. That's the mission of the Spirit. That's the mission we've been given through the power of the Spirit. And that is why today is so important. Amen. Amen.